Think about handing over the reins to your financial future. Entrusting someone with your savings, your investments. That act relies on something absolutely fundamental. Trust.
Exactly. And that's precisely where our deep dive begins today. We're exploring the ethical considerations for investment advisors.
Right.
And we have some really insightful material here, and it all keeps circling back to one core idea. In this profession, ethical behavior isn't just like a nice to have, it's the very foundation.
The bedrock.
Yeah, for building lasting trust and ultimately achieving long-term success for everyone involved, the advisor, the client, the industry.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks then. When we talk about ethics here, what are we really pointing to? It's a word we hear a lot, but our sources define it as, well, the moral principles that guide our behavior. They shape what we consider right, not just for us, but, for society.
And the origin is interesting too, right? The Greek ethos.
Yeah, meaning custom, habit, character.
Yeah.
It's about that guidance for how we act, especially when it affects other people.
And the material highlights some core principles that keep popping up.
Yeah.
Honesty, fairness, diligence, care, and just basic respect for others. These aren't just abstract ideas. They have real-world impact.
Right. Now, it's crucial, I think, to make a distinction here. Just because something isn't illegal doesn't automatically make it ethical.
That's a really key point. Our sources are very clear on that. Legality is, operating within the law's boundaries. Minimum standard.
But ethics,
Yeah.
that goes deeper, doesn't it? Into right and wrong based on our values, beliefs we've built up over a lifetime.
Exactly. And the example they use is great. The advisor who doesn't provide essential follow-up service after a sale. Maybe not technically illegal, right? But it's a clear breach of ethical conduct. It violates that sense of care, that responsibility you have.
So with all that said, what's our main objective today? What are we really hoping you, the listener, will take away from this discussion?
Well, our mission here is really to pull out the most vital aspects of ethical conduct, specifically for investment advisors. We want to understand not just what the standards are, but maybe more importantly, why they're so critical. Basically, we want to give you clear, actionable insights into this really important area.
All right, let's get into the substance then. Our sources spend quite a bit of time on why ethical conduct in business is so important, and it goes way beyond just, making a profit.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how ethical practices actually contribute to the moral fabric of society. They provide that moral underpinning for how a company operates.
And for investment advisors especially, people entrusted with someone else's financial well-being. Upholding these standards seems absolutely crucial for earning respect.
Totally. And this brings us straight to the client-first principle. It really stands out in the material.
It does. The idea that an advisor must put the client's interest above absolutely everything else seems like common sense, but clearly fundamental here.
It is, because the heart of that relationship is trust. And as the sources remind us, trust takes ages to build.
But can vanish in an instant.
Exactly. So when advisors consistently prioritize their clients, that trust becomes solid.
It's also about fairness, isn't it? Not just for the one client, but for the public perception too. People need to feel business is conducted fairly, without exploiting anyone.
Precisely. And this links directly to avoiding conflicts of interest. Ethical advisors are proactive. They look for situations where their interests might clash with the client's.
And they make sure the client wins out.
Yeah, they're actively looking out for the client's well-being.
The material also touches on this idea of business leaders, and I guess investment advisors fit here too, being seen as role models. There's an expectation of ethical conduct.
That's a really interesting angle. Being entrusted with someone's money, it's a huge responsibility. Ethical conduct is how they show they're worthy of that trust.
And it's about the long game too, right? Short-term gains from cutting ethical corners.
They just don't last. Our sources say abandoning ethical principles can lead to the complete collapse of everything you've built.
Yeah.
And regaining that trust, almost impossible.
Okay, so let's delve into some of the specific ethical challenges advisors face. Their unique position as financial intermediaries is highlighted.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're conducting savings with investments, right? Which benefits both companies needing capital and people wanting to grow wealth.
We're in a market like India, with so many complex products.
Exactly. The advisor has a big responsibility to guide investors towards suitable options, things that actually match their needs and goals.
And there's that Zig Ziglar quote the material includes, "You can have everything in life you want if you will just help other people get what they want."
I love that quote. It really reframes success, doesn't it? It shows how focusing on the client isn't just ethically right. It's also the the smartest path for the advisor long term.
Makes sense. When the investor's well-being is central, everyone benefits.
Right.
But this brings us to a potential friction point. Sales targets versus the client's best interests. You can see how that pressure could create issues.
Absolutely. The pressure to hit targets could definitely overshadow what's genuinely best for the investor, but the material stresses. The investor has to be at the heart of every decision.
Otherwise, those short-term gains just aren't worth the long-term damage to trust.
Exactly. Any benefit from pushing unsuitable products is tiny compared to building a strong, lasting client relationship.
Okay, so the sources then list some common investor grievances. These really highlight where ethics can break down. First up, not understanding the client's specific situation.
Yeah, this is huge. It's where proper risk profiling comes in, like the example they give, recommending volatile small-cap funds to a retired senior citizen without checking their risk tolerance.
That's a clear ethical lapse, a failure to prioritize the client's actual needs.
Definitely. Then there's the issue of advisors not fully understanding the products they're selling, especially the risks.
Leading to misrepresentation.
Potentially, yeah. Selling arbitrage funds as like a direct substitute for liquid funds without explaining the potential volatility. That's not giving the full picture, failing to educate.
And what about advisors not having a broad market view, just focusing on what's hot right now?
That's another one. Recommending small cap funds just because that sector is rallying without giving context or mentioning alternatives. That's not holistic advice, is it?
No, it lacks perspective. And then there's churning. That sounds pretty bad.
It is. It's basically excessive trading just to generate commissions for the advisor, blatantly putting their own gain over the client's.
Our material notes SEBI, the regulator in India, has tried to address this by separating advice and distribution.
Which helps, but yeah, churning is a major breach of trust and hurts the client's returns.
Another big one, not properly explaining the risks, only highlighting the potential upside.
Transparency is just non-negotiable here, not mentioning the higher default risk in, say, distressed debt funds. That's a serious ethical failure. Clients need the full story, good and bad.
And finally, poor after-sales service. Making the sale and then disappearing.
Yeah, or not following through on promises. It shows a lack of ongoing commitment. Ethics covers the whole relationship, not just the transaction.
This leads us nicely into the idea of an ethical dilemma. The sources define it as a situation with two choices, neither feeling, perfect.
Right. And apparently advisors face these quite often. The choice they make really shows their true ethical colors, doesn't it?
The example given is pretty clear. An advisor needs income, but a client doesn't really need a service. Dilemma: push the service for the fee or advise against it.
Exactly, that classic conflict. Self-interest versus client's best interest. And the material breaks these dilemmas down further. First, the pure ethical dilemma,
where both options seem to violate some principle, like growing the business fast, but maybe sacrificing service quality.
Versus growing slowly and risking the business itself. Tough spot.
Yeah. And then there's the clash between personal and professional values.
Like personally believing in simple term insurance, but feeling pressure to sell higher commission products like ULIPs. That internal conflict.
So how do advisors tackle these tricky situations? Any guidance?
Well, the first suggestion is often deeper analysis. Sometimes really digging into it reveals a clearer ethical path than first appear.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
Relying on specific principles, like choosing the option that does the most good or maybe the least harm for everyone involved.
Utilitarian approach, kind of.
Sort of, yeah. Or sometimes just rethinking the problem entirely can uncover new solutions you hadn't considered before.
The digital age adds another layer too, right? So much information, opinions flying around.
Absolutely. It makes the advisor's role in providing clear, ethically justified advice even more critical, cutting through the noise.
Now let's talk about a really key concept, fiduciary responsibility. The sources stress that advisors are fiduciaries. What does that actually mean for the listener?
Well, at its core, it's a legal and ethical duty to act in the absolute best interests of the client. Period. Clients' needs come before everything else, especially the advisor's own interests or potential conflicts.
It's built entirely on trust, and that Latin phrase comes up again, uberme fidei.
Utmost good faith. Sounds formal, but it's fundamental. It means acting with complete trust, not profiting unfairly at the client's expense, not taking advantage. It's the essence of being a fiduciary.
So what are the key obligations that come with that?
Okay, first, full disclosure. Absolutely vital. Disclose all relevant facts, especially potential conflicts of interest. No misleading the client. It's about actively sharing everything necessary.
And the advice has to be suitable, right? Not one size fits all.
Exactly. Tailored to the client's specific situation, their finances, goals, risk tolerance, requires proper assessment.
And the reasons for the recommendations need to be objective, not just based on what pays the advisor more.
That's right. Recommendations must be driven by the client's needs, not the advisor's pocket. And finally, the actual execution, carrying out the plan, must also be free of conflicts.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, the sources include a really practical section. SEBI's do's and don'ts for investors. This seems like direct guidance for you, our listener.
Absolutely. It's designed to empower investors, help them protect themselves, and find ethical advisors. Let's start with the do's. Crucially, only deal with SEBI-registered advisors.
Especially important now with all the online finfluencers, many unregistered.
Definitely. And you should check the registration number. SEBI provides a link for that. Make sure they have a valid certificate.
What else?
Pay advisory fees only through banking channels. Keep receipts. Always insist on risk profiling. Make sure advice matches it.
And don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Clear up all doubts before acting.
Yes, and assess everything. Risk return, liquidity, safety before investing. Get terms and conditions in writing, fees, plans, recommendations signed and stamped.
Stay vigilant. And if you have grievances,
approach the authorities. And definitely tell SEBI if anyone promises guaranteed returns. Huge red flag.
okay, now the don'ts. First one echoes the first do. Don't deal with unregistered folks no matter how many social media followers they have.
Right. Online fame isn't a qualification. Also, don't fall for stock tips disguised as advice. Real advice is personalized.
And this is critical. Never give money directly to the advisor for investment.
Never. Funds go to the product or platform. Also, don't fall for promises of crazy high or guaranteed returns. If it sounds too good to be true,
It probably is. Avoid greed.
don't get swayed by flashy ads or rumors. Don't make decisions just based on random calls or messages.
Don't feel pressured by repeated contact or limited time offers either.
Exactly. And most importantly, don't rush into investments that don't fit your risk profile and goals. Take your time.
Good practical advice. The material also mentions annual audits.
Yeah, advisors have to get an annual compliance audit from a chartered accountant.
And, importantly, they have to disclose any major audit findings to clients. Again, transparency.
That's the key. Finally, let's touch briefly on global best practices. Ethical behavior is a focus everywhere.
Like in the U.S. with the SEC.
Right. They require disclosure of financial issues that could affect the advisor or major disciplinary actions from the past 10 years. Written policies on risks are needed too.
And a code of ethics is mandatory.
Yes, with minimum requirements. Standards of conduct, compliance with laws, reporting personal trades, pre-approving certain investments like IPOs, reporting violations, distributing the code, keeping records. It's pretty comprehensive.
And in Australia.
Similar focus. Competence, honesty, integrity, fairness. Strict penalties for violations. They have a detailed best interests standard too.
Which involves specific steps.
Yeah, things like identifying the client's situation and goals, the advice scope, relevant circumstances, making sure info is correct, investigating suitable products, basing judgments on the client's situation, basically demonstrating they've really acted in the client's best interest.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've really underscored just how vital ethics are for investment advisors.
Absolutely. The key things that stand out are the necessity of ethics for trust, the client first rule being paramount.
And the potential dangers for everyone when ethics are ignored. We also looked at ethical dilemmas.
Right, how to navigate them, the weight of fiduciary duty, and that practical guidance from SEBI, plus seeing how it fits into global standards.
Ultimately, understanding all this isn't just for advisors. It empowers you, our listener, to make smarter choices, to be more discerning about who guides your financial journey.
Then maybe that leads to our final thought for you to ponder. How can you actively assess the ethical standards in your own financial dealings? Think about the advisors you might work with. It's about recognizing the responsibility that comes with managing your financial future and the absolutely critical role ethics plays in protecting it.